Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. Because this was the last year of the 4-team playoff, they're transitioning to 12 teams. I didn't have any problem leaving Florida State out. You didn't have to answer for years about it anymore. Their final thing was, let's just get these 4 teams in. We think they're the best teams along with Georgia, but Georgia lost the last game, and c'est la vie, that's life. I loved how Washington matched up against Texas, and I did pick Michigan narrowly over Alabama. The line movement is telling me that the wise guys are on Michigan. I do like Michigan ball controlling Washington here, although I think Washington, because I don't think any college team has 3 good corners. So I just think Washington's going to be able to score. And especially if they're scoring late and Michigan's protecting a 10-point lead, Washington's really going to move the ball down the field. So Michigan has to be an aggressive team. You cannot take your foot off the gas with Washington's coach, their quarterback. So let's start with that. I like Michigan sort of 30-26. I think the line's appropriate, but I do like Michigan, and there's going to be points. It will not be Texas-Washington. It won't look like that. It'll be much more physical, much more between the 20s, more field goals. But what say you on the prediction? I'll take Michigan.
Well, you're talking to the biggest Husky fan here, because when I went to DraftKings and they said they all listened to the podcast, I might have spread $1,000 on them 7-1, so I'm rooting for them. Now, if I had to bet after the Texas game, I'm not betting on this individual game. I just took it because of the value. And Joel Klatt, I heard him on your show. This Michigan team built themselves for that C.J. Stroud explosive Ohio State team. So they're built to handle this. Now, listen, this is Jim Harbaugh, to me, is never going to get a better opportunity to win a championship. And that might come even when he makes it back to the NFL in the Super Bowl. I mean, he's a favorite against a team that he clearly should beat. Now, the difference is the Big Ten's pretty bad. I mean, as we had time after the bowl season, Ohio State's quarterback got ran out of town. Penn State's quarterback, who I heard for 3 years was the next Josh Allen, was awful. Who's the best quarterback they played this year? Tua's brother? I mean,
yeah, I think so.
It's not Alabama's guy. So the only saving grace why I feel kind of good, at least having a chance, is like this offense is pretty special. I mean, Penix is, when the dust settles, unless his knee doesn't check out at the combine, like it's a degenerate knee, I don't see how he doesn't get drafted really high. And if he goes on and lights these guys up, even if they lose, I mean, you're talking about a big-time NFL quarterback prospect. And he has elite wide receivers. Now, Michigan has NFL DBs, but they have 3 NFL wide receivers. One guy who's going to go in the top 15, top 20. The other 2 are going on day 2, and they're all big. They all have great catching radiuses. Their coach, the reason I loved, and I told you this last week, Washington against Texas, I just thought it was a huge coaching mismatch. Well, I mean, Harbaugh's the real deal. I mean,
they have a great DC.
They have a great DC who's an NFL guy. They have Sharon Moore, who's a Bob Stoops guy, who's really good. I mean, Harbaugh. One thing about Jim Harbaugh, his staff is always good. You know, John can go through ups and downs. It's a little harder in the NFL. Jim's staff, from the moment he got to Stanford, was elite. So there's no coaching mismatch. Like, honestly, DuBois and Grubb are going to have a great game. They had a good game. Obviously, they kind of fell apart at the end. But can Penix, what's he been sacked 11 times? Can they get to him? Because if they don't, then to me, Washington will have a chance. If they're peppering him, remember Oregon in the game you were at up in Washington, they started peppering him in the second half. I think that's when he hurt his ribs, and over the next month he wasn't the same. But Oregon easily could have won that game because they started mollywhopping him, like every other play, crushing him. And to me, Michigan's kind of built to do that. If they can avoid that. The other thing Washington's really good at, like this running back, let's say he's not even close to 60%. They can generate runs with the quick passing game, which is basically the same thing. That's what Andy Reid's always said. Like, I can run these, and Kyle, these quick screens that basically are 80-90% completion percentage. Even if we get 4 or 5 yards, keeps the clock going and operates that as a run. And they start doing that against Texas. And no team takes those quick little screens and just gains 7-8 yards like Washington. So they're going to have to hit those, and obviously the big plays, which are going to be harder than some of the games they've played. But I give Washington a chance just because of their offensive personnel. And defensively, I mean, Trice is an NFL guy. If you know, Michigan's tackles aren't great. Their interior offensive line's elite, but their tackles. But is Harbaugh liable to have 45 rushing attempts and like we
Yeah.
ain't even throwing because he is.
Yeah. So a side note to this, if Harbaugh jettisons Michigan, exits the college football, do you know who the number one candidate for the Michigan job is?
Would have to be Kalen DeBoer, right?
Kalen DeBoer. I read it today. So, and what's interesting is, here's what's interesting. I was told a week ago that and Ryan Day shouldn't be dismissed, but if he was, Ohio State would hire Kalen DeBoer. So here's what's interesting. This is where Ohio State's kind of screwed. Either going to face Harbaugh going forward, or they're going to make a bid for Kalen DeBoer. They may also make a bid for Ben Johnson with the Lions, although, no, I would take Kalen DeBoer. But I will say this about college football. And, John, years and years ago, when I was at ESPN, I had told some of the upper management, I said, you guys should go buy UFC. I said, you're living in your Red Sox tunnel, Yankees. I said, UFC is catching fire in Vegas. And they just thought it was too violent. You look up now, they could have had that thing for $400 million. It sold for $6 billion. Years ago, I met Don Garber, MLS commissioner, and I told him, I said, I would love to get a piece of an MLS team. Couldn't afford it. It's Tony Robbins, Magic Johnson, Will Ferrell. You can't own stock, you ownership in college football, but I do believe next year will be the start of an almost revolution of college football sort of overtaking baseball and the NBA. We're sitting on this playoff format, which we've known. You and I are college football junkies. We've known forever. Can we just have a 12, 16 teamer, right? And I pushed back for years on it because my argument was always, hey, there's never been a team with 2 to 3 losses in college football, though LSU once got to a natty, I think, with 2 losses.
Alabama.
There's never been a team in college football with 2 losses that I thought that's the best team in the country.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, that's not the point. The point is we love tournaments, and they're fair and they're weird and they give you great drama. I think not only is college football a stock to buy, if it's a $12 stock, it's 24 next year. But I also think the college football playoff is going to become March Madness on steroids. It's going to be NFL playoffs and college football playoffs, and then everything else in sports, like NBA, everything else domestically. That's my take on what's going to happen. Just, am I hyperbolic? Am I over the top? Because I do love college football, but I feel like, guys, it's a whole new world next year in college football.
Well, imagine if we would have had the 12th teamer this year, Ole Miss and Oregon and some of these teams that could have made some noise and just made the whole thing really interesting. I don't know where you stand on Jim. I'm hoping he stays because the NFL doesn't need him. Like historic ratings, they could have me and you coaching teams. You get 30 million people watching if you put it on Monday Night Football. I think he's better for college football, right?
Yes.
College sports and my entire college basketball when I was a kid in the 90s was huge. The coaches were really famous, right? Tark, Kay, Roy Williams, all these guys. And obviously college football was like that then, but even more now with the Sabans, the Kirbys, Jim Harbaugh, Lincoln Riley. So I hope he stays. And luckily financially, there was always a big gap why guys would leave because the colleges could never match the NFL money. Now, if Michigan wanted to pay him $15 million a year, they easily could. And that video, I don't have kids yet. You do. I do think sometimes you lean towards certain kids. Clearly his parents love Jim a little more than John. Now, Jim's a little, I think, closer to Jack personality-wise than John's a little more normal from what I've been told, even though all the Harbaugh's a little crazy. I do wonder the thing he has going with his parents living close to him, what he has in Michigan. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I hope he stays. And I've rooted for Jim Harbaugh every game he's coached since Stanford up until tomorrow night when I'm going to root for the Huskies. I think he's better at Michigan. Right now, I'm not going to complain if he comes to the pros, but I do think there's something pretty special. That team, the thing that goes with both, that stuff really means something to Jim. It's why that I think that the Raiders have a shot at Jim because I think the Al Davis, the alumni, like Jim he's a football nerd. Like it's all he thinks about 24, his family and football. Like Belichick, and that type of stuff, Al Davis, Bill Walsh, like this is all these guys want to talk about and be around. So I hope Jim stays because, like you said, college football is clearly the number 2 sport in America. And you have some nights where it's like, what did the games last week? We're doing like 25 million people that first game.
Crazy.
So
crazy.
And Michigan, how many teams in the NFL are a bigger brand than Michigan football?
Well, I've
10?
been saying this for years. If now you have 2 recruiting cycles in college, which it really does, it's a regressive lifestyle for
that's
the
what's
coaches.
driving him away to me, the NIL, the transfer portal, some of that.
But and I think they're putting up more and more guardrails on it. But I've been saying this from the beginning. If I had Patrick Mahomes, the NFL is better than Michigan. Dallas Cowboy job potentially is better than Michigan. Boy, and it ends right around there. Again, Joe Burrow, he's hurt a lot. Buffalo, I don't want to live there. Love you, Buffalo, but Ann Arbor's, I'm going to live there. Michigan, when it's rolling, is, especially for a Michigan man, I just don't think they're 5. I've always said this.
Well, Jim coached at the 49ers already. How many jobs are bigger than the 49ers? And he got run out of town. 5,
I mean,
maybe? Not even?
No. I mean, the Niners have great city, some generational pressure because of their success. York's a pretty good owner. Lynch is an excellent GM. So there's a handful that are better. I do think eventually college football has to figure out, and I think they will over time with a 12-team playoff, a schedule maker, and there'll be a little more reasonable fairness where, the SEC guys are scheduling Citadel 4 times a year. Yeah. Pac-12 was always much more courageous on their schedules. But I just don't – I think when you get to these Texas, like Sark, now, you may be disappointed and there's some pressure, but there's pressure from impulsive billionaire owners. How many jobs are better than Texas? I got to live in Austin, Texas.
And I get a alumni base willing to cut huge checks to stock my roster. How many teams in the SEC have more money than him? Newsflash, none. So it's like Sark has, you could argue now financially, him, USC, Ohio State. I mean, you could argue that college football is even going to separate more and more. These SEC teams with all the money coming in has separated over the last decade. All their sports are better now. College basketball, their basketball programs are paying $6-7 million to their basketball coaches. So, and the Big Ten is going to be like that too. The thing is, to me, once you get at Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, the transfer portal, a guy, every player is a free agent 24/7, 365, but you are more likely to keep them at those schools because you have the mechanisms in place to pay them. And it's such a special place. Like if you're a redshirt freshman, you walk out at the University of Georgia, Ohio State, or Michigan, you're like, this is where I'd want to play. You're going to transfer like Syracuse, no chance. So when you see those transfers happening, it's pretty clear. Ohio State told the quarterback, you're not going to be the starter next year. He didn't transfer because, he was mad. They told him, you're not good enough. And that's the one thing that I wonder if coaches get a little tired of just having to deal with all that. And maybe that's Jim. Obviously the NCAA, but Jim's crazy enough that I could see him like the NCAA, whatever. I don't even give a shit about them.